Hi, and welcome to the Design Find podcast, a space where women are interviewed and in conversation to discuss the highs, lows, and everything in between about being a woman in design. The Design Find has new episodes every Monday, so make sure you come back every week. You can find more on the Design Find podcast Instagram. Hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, and welcome to the Design Find the podcast. Today we have Taelyr, and she's going to be sharing with us her story in the design field. So welcome, Taelyr.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So to start off, can you please just introduce yourself, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So, like you said, my name is Taelyr Roberts. I am originally from Dallas, Texas. I went to school for entrepreneurship, not, thinking that it would turn into this necessarily, but it has, and I'm incredibly grateful. I really just wanted to find a way to infuse aromatherapy with really, honestly, cute jewelry. And create a personalized aromatherapy experience. And so when I discovered clay, I realized that it was the perfect medium for it and kind of just kept going.
So can you kind of explain your product a little bit more and like your brand as a whole?
Sure. So Hippie Adjacent is, I like to say, and what our tagline reads, essential accessories for people who revel in beautiful contradictions. So the name kind of came about because it's how I describe myself. I'm not quite hippie, but I'm not quite not. And so our product allows for people to diffuse essential oils throughout the day. But the earrings are just as cute as they are functional. And so we've since expanded to a couple of other products like room sprays and candles, but the main and like core product is definitely the earrings because they, really do capture that personalized aromatherapy experience moment.
So that's a really great product, and I'm sure most people have not heard about that before. What kind of caught your eye and made you think, oh, I should start something like this? Or you really thought like, oh, I need to create this for the world?
Well, because there are lots of aromatherapy jewelry businesses. I'm definitely not the first one to have come up with aromatherapy jewelry, but I noticed in looking for a product for myself that a lot of them just tended not to match my style. A lot of them are based on like lava rocks or terracotta beads, which if you've seen, they're not the most attractive thing in the world. They're definitely functional, but there was that form piece missing. And so I wanted to add a little bit more style and beauty into the space. And so while I would say people who self-describe as hippies care about beauty, I would say it's probably not the most high priority. And so for me, I'm like, I like things to be fashionable and functional. And so that's why I wanted to fill the gap in that space.
And what were you doing before you started this company?
Well, I worked and still work actually in economic development. I currently work a full-time 9 to 5 as well, but ironically enough, my full-time job is supporting other small business owners. So entrepreneurship and small business are kind of my life and have been for a while.
So what made you think that I still have this job? What can I do with the extra time to actually start the process and create your own small business?
Well, I've never been one for idle time, as pretty much any of my family and friends can tell you. And so I kind of just started to try and experiment with different mediums and materials and things of that nature. This is actually isn't my first jewelry business. I started my first jewelry business at 13 and closed it during college because it was just kind of too much to keep up with both. And so I kind of felt ready enough to start a new business and to stick my toe back in the proverbial entrepreneurial pool. And so it kind of felt like the right time. I guess I had enough peace around it where I was like, okay, I'm willing to give this a go. And if it fails, it fails. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And we'll just kind of go with the flow and see what happens. And so I'm trying to incorporate that into my sort of daily being now. When I get really stressed out about sales or about not having finished my to-do list for the day, I kind of try and remember, well, you started this to go with the flow. So go with the flow now and stop stressing about this.
So you mentioned that you started a business when you were 13 for jewelry as well. What kind of drew you to jewelry, and did you create and design all these products, or like what kind of, yeah, what attracted to you to this like medium?
Yeah, so I did create and design all of those products as well. As my mom will certainly tell you, I've had kind of the artsy bug pretty much since birth. I did some of everything, knitting and crocheting and latch hooking and soap making and like all of these random things. But I sort of settled into jewelry because my aunt at the time was really into Home Shopping Network. And she collected and still collects to some degree like gemstones and things of that nature. And so one of the times she bought gemstones, it came with these cabochons and this like wire wrapping jewelry making kit. And she's like, I'm not going to do this. So she gave it to me because she knew I was just like super artsy. She was like, I feel like you'd get a kick out of this. And so I did. And I watched all the videos from the Home Shopping Network lady being like, you do it like this, you do it like that. And so kind of like Picasso says, I learned all the rules around wire wrapping and things like that and decided to break them. And so I just kind of got my start from there, and the business was doing really well and it was taking off. And so I got pretty good at wire wrapping. One of my favorite things I think I've probably ever made was a 2-finger bike ring that I made for one of my friends. And so he wore it a ton, and when it finally broke, he's like, hey, I need you to make me a new one. Because he loved it too. And so, it was really interesting to see the things that I was able to make with wire. And so I feel like my exploration with wire and then beading kind of allowed me to create some really cool things here for Hippie Adjacent and allow me to lean on some of those principles more than like traditional clay and things like that. So it's been a really cool experience so far.
And what made you think of the design, or how you came up with like jewelry ideas when you were younger?
Oh, it's kind of the same then as it was now. I'm inspired by life. Like I'll be walking around and see a lighting fixture and I'm like, ooh, I could use that. And so I'm automatically, like workshopping in my brain, how do I make this possible with, wire or clay and forms and gravity. Um, and so I've been inspired by trees, by flowers, and some of them honestly just kind of pop into my head. I wish I had a better explanation of, oh no, I follow this process and this process and this process, but it's just not true. I can really just be walking down the street and in my head, I'll see a really cool earring and it's like, ooh, I want to try that. And so it was kind of the same for my first jewelry business, except that one focused more on necklaces. And so it was honestly kind of the same thing. I'd just be, going about my day and say, ooh, that could be cool. So yeah.
What kind of switched your focus from necklace to jewelry, and also in addition to that, adding aromatherapy like oils to it?
Yeah, so after I graduated college, I started, living an adult life and having a job and things like that. And I realized that being an adult kind of sucked. And I was always pretty stressed. And so I kind of started exploring, these more traditional methods of how to de-stress. And so it was a number of things, but aromatherapy became a big part of that. And so I started learning how to do like essential oil blending for it to get desired effects. So like if I wanted to de-stress, or if I wanted to, calm down, or if I wanted to be energized, what blends would sort of elicit that response from my body. And so my coworkers used to laugh at me because they were like, we can always tell when someone has irritated you, because I'd be sitting at my desk, like holding a bottle of essential oils to my nose, trying to like inhale deeply and and calm down. And so, anyone who's been in a working world, you want to have like a better poker face than that, right? Like you don't want necessarily people to know the exact moment when you're stressed or when you're trying to calm down or things like that. So it's like there has to be a more inconspicuous way for this to happen. And so that's when I started researching aromatherapy jewelry to buy. And then I was like, well, these are fine, but they're not the most beautiful, jewelry pieces that I've ever seen in my life. And so I wanted to create something that was a little bit more fashionable, because I really do love fashion. I really do love jewelry. I really do love clothes. And so I wanted something that would mirror or I should say enhance my wardrobe, not necessarily detract from it, but also have that aromatherapy component.
I love that story. I can tell when you're stressed because the oils. I think that's hilarious. What's for people who don't know, what are like the benefits of essential oils and what type of essential oils should people have in their life?
Oh, yeah. So, something I learned when I started this business is actually that you can get a degree in like essential oils and aromatherapy from certain institutions. So that's really cool. And I am not one of those incredibly degreed people. So I think for my personal use is all I can speak from. And so the ones that I really love a lot are lavender, because I think that it's just by far the most calming one. And as a person who can be a little high strung, lavender is a really good base for me. But you can even use essential oils for things like helping mitigate allergy symptoms. Like when my allergies are really going haywire, I tend to diffuse peppermint, because it helps with like the coughing and things of that nature. And then for energy, orange or grapefruit tend to be my favorites. And in order to have like round out the notes or have a little bit more balance, I'll add patchouli or something like that, which is a grounding essential oil. And so that's those are sort of my go-to ones. I would say lavender, peppermint, orange, grapefruit, and patchouli are my big ones, but there's a huge world of essential oils. And so I definitely encourage people to play with what works best for them and, what makes them feel good. And Oracacia is one of my favorites because they just have like a reliably, consistently amazing product. And so I tend to use those. Or from local small distilleries and things of that nature, because I think that they tend to be distilled with a lot of care and with a lot of intention. But yeah, I think it really comes down to your personal taste. You should totally, experiment and see what works for you, but always remember to dilute if you're going to apply them to your skin, because they are a medicinal product. And I would definitely be sure to check with your doctor to make sure that nothing interferes with any medications that you're currently on.
Well, thank you so much for informing us all about that. If people were to use it, would they just buy a diffuser? Or you mentioned putting it on your skin. What are some areas that you think would be really good to put essential oils on?
So I tend to put it, in the same place that I put perfume, is how I typically use it. But my recommendation would be a diffuser, just because it's the safest way, I think, health-wise, again, to make sure that nothing's interacting with, your body chemistry or any medicines that you're currently on. Diffuser makes it really, really easy to, incorporate it as a part of your daily practice. And you just, add some water and drop a couple of drops of essential oil in and do it that way. So diffuser is definitely my go-to, but if you talk to your doctor, then I think applying to your skin is perfectly fine as long as you dilute.
And kind of going back onto your work schedule and balancing your job as well as a small business, what are some tips for people who are in your same situation? And when do you think is the right time to fully quit a job to focus on your business?
Well, so for me, I know that balance happens best when I get my full 8 hours of sleep. So I try really hard to prioritize my bedtime. And it's funny because I've heard people talk about, like parenting yourself in some ways as an adult. And it's definitely, I think, one of the most important ways that I parent myself, because I force myself to stop at like 11 o'clock every night, even when I'm working on jewelry and I feel like I'm in a real creative flow. I always have to, sort of write down my notes of what my brain was firing on the night before, but I make sure to go to bed so that I can get up and have a productive day the following day and not be groggy and, things of that nature. As for when it's the right time to quit a job, I don't know that I have advice for that. So as a person who still works a full-time job, maybe just because I want the additional financial stability, I do really believe in, keeping your full-time job maybe until at least like what you're able to take out of your business matches what you currently make. But I recognize that I am slightly more risk averse than most of the entrepreneurs that I know. But I'm a big fan of waiting till it feels comfortable and when it feels right to do so, both from a financial and an instinctual perspective.
So kind of looking at your branding and who you are as a company, what kind of came to your mind at first when you were starting your company about, what your social media presence would be like, how you would sell your company? How did you kind of brainstorm all of that?
Yeah. So I actually really freaked out about the branding at first, and it's kind of a joke almost because I was a marketing major, and I actually did marketing and branding consulting for a few other small businesses. So it was a cruel irony that I was so stressed out about my own marketing and branding because you have this idea of, oh, this can go in so many ways, and choosing the way was really hard. And so I did what I recommend everyone does, and I phoned a friend. So fortunately, I know other, branding folks and have other branding folks in my circle. And so I called a friend, Felicity, and she was really helpful in, helping me hone in on what I wanted to communicate around my brand and how I wanted it to feel. And I knew that I wanted the social media presence of this company to feel warm and be community based and, to be approachable and flexible in a way that allowed people to feel like this wasn't my brand, it was our brand. And I do think that it communicates that. I wanted it to be chic. I wanted it to be, but I wanted it to be chic, but I also wanted it to be fun and warm. And so that's how we kind of landed on the mustard yellow colors, because when she sort of helped me zero in on what I wanted to do, we came to 3 words, which are fluid, sophisticated, and essential. And so I wanted all of the design and all of the pieces to feel warm and approachable, but in a sophisticated way. And I wanted people to be able to express their fullest selves, and wanted Hippie Adjacent to just be a part of them showcasing their most authentic self so that they could have that confidence to be who they truly are.
And kind of going on the design and creation part of your product, what is kind of the process from start to finish of creating a pair of earrings or something like that?
Sure. So of course it starts with that design piece, obviously. And so whether it was inspired by something or whether it just popped into my head, and of course all starts there. I usually sketch out just like a rough design, and kind of toy around with it. Do I want there to be a pattern? Do I want there to be some sort of texture on it or something like that? And then I pick a color, which feels kind of backwards. I feel like people tend to pick color than texture, but I go the other way. And then sort of pick a color and sort of see what the vibe for that particular style is. Then I start figuring out how to execute it. If it's particularly more complex, I tend to do a few different test runs to see, what looks the best in terms of the technique that I use to execute it. And then because, the clay that I use requires baking, I bake it, and then pull it out of the oven and sand it and buff it to make sure all the edges are really smooth and it has that really polished look. And then I assemble it and put them on an earring card and then put them up for sale. And there are pictures in there somewhere in between for the website and things of that nature. But that's the general process for one pair of earrings.
And how long does that usually take?
Ooh, it varies widely based on the complexity. So, if it has 4 or 5 or 6 parts, that can take a little bit longer, especially if I have to measure where I, drill a hole to assemble them. But if they're, more complex or, there's only one piece, that's significantly less time. So it really kind of just depends on how many parts there are and how complex the design is. So it can be from 15 minutes to, one of my more elaborate pieces, which can take like 2 hours for a pair of earrings.
And do you see, obviously you're the owner of your company and you stand by your company, but what are some of the benefits you believe occur when you wear essential oil infused earrings?
Oh, I think that it really does allow me to maintain a nice sort of equilibrium, if that makes sense. I do notice that when I have like lavender, for example, on my earrings, and someone, so I actually don't own a car. I walk a lot. And so I live in Texas, and they're not always the most kind to pedestrians because it definitely is a driving city. And so, if someone, like blows a light or whatever, and I'm in the intersection, I just noticed that I don't get as upset. It's kind of like, that was a choice. It's more of like I'm a passive observer of like this really terrible thing that, in theory would have in theory occurred to me, but it's kind of like, I'm not gonna let this one moment ruin this day, and so I can kind of just let it roll off and keep going. I'm a big fan of like RuPaul's Drag Race, and so one of the drag queens that's on there has this phrase where she's like, "Water off a duck's back," and so that's kind of how it feels when I'm, wearing my hippie adjacent earrings. It's kind of like just water off a duck's back. Things that would have maybe been more frustrating for me are significantly less frustrating because I, catch that little whiff of lavender. So it's nice.
I think that's good. I think everyone needs that in their life.
I agree.
So what is kind of more something you want to see more of in like the jewelry field or the small business field?
I actually think I would like to see more handmade jewelry creators. And I don't know if it's, from working with small businesses all of these years, or, being, a jewelry designer myself at this point, but I find small batch jewelry to be so much more interesting than, what I find at a big box store, because I can tell that it was made with, again, with care and with intention, and it's going to be more unique than anything you're going to grab at one of those big stores. Even, like the minimalist pieces, I just find that they have more soul, I guess. And so I would actually like to see more people sort of express themselves in that way, because I feel like when we all sort of lean into our most creative selves, we can accomplish some really great things, whether it be in terms of jewelry or, other spaces. So I'd like to see more jewelry creators out there, which I know feels like a weird statement because it's like, that's more competition, but I actually really would, just because I love seeing other people's perspectives in the jewelry space.
And for you as a consumer of jewelry, not of your own brand, but when you're buying other pieces of jewelry, what is something that you look for?
Well, I think that when you own a jewelry business, the first thing you do is buy less jewelry, maybe. And so I do actually buy jewelry from a ton of other makers. And the first thing I look for is, kind of, does it speak to me? And is it unique? Is it something that, I could create myself, of course, without infringing on anyone else's ideas and things of that nature? And, if the answer is, correct for all of those questions, and I'm like, I'm just going to take I'm going to go ahead and get it. I actually bought some earrings the other day from another maker who I love and I think is really, really talented. And so I really, in kind of the same way that I buy jewelry when I'm out and about, it's really like the main question is, does it speak to me? I think is a really big part of it.
I completely understand. And it must also kind of be hard because you know so much about the creation aspect of jewelry. And if you, for example, went to H&M or one of those fast fashion stores and they sell kind of like a piece like earrings for like a quarter of the price that you have, but you understand like there's no time and effort made into it, that must be kind of frustrating.
Oh, it's super frustrating, but I kind of, in the same way with the previous experience I was telling you about, it's like water off a duck's back. Like, I'm not gonna. There's never going to be an end to fast fashion and fast jewelry unless, we all kind of decide like, oh, that's not where we want to spend our money. And, that's not a choice, honestly, for some people. Like, capitalism being what it is, and wealth gaps being what they are, like, I don't think that it's feasible for everyone to spend, $40-$50 on a pair of earrings. Like, it's just not. And so I still think that people who aren't able to afford, $40 earrings should still be able to wear earrings. And so to some degree it's frustrating, but I also recognize that there are other factors at play. However, I do now think that I'm a much better judge of, like quality accessories. And given the amount that I know about clay and about just jewelry in general and metal quality and the difference between gold filled and gold plate and things of that nature, it allows me to make more informed choices around what to buy.
Completely. I for sure agree. And there's so much, especially for people. I don't know if you've ever had a problem with this, but sometimes like your skin's really sensitive and like the materials they use, like it turns your skin green, or like especially earrings, it can get like your earring hole like all black. So I think especially for those people, it's really hard to like buy. So it's great that there's good quality jewelry out there.
I agree, and I am one of the sensitive skin and sensitive ear people, and so all of the posts that I use that where I make the top myself have gold plated or gold filled jewelry, and I don't use products that include any nickel or any lead or anything like that. If I'm inserting the post myself. Now, sometimes I do buy more interesting or fancy like toppers and things like that. So that's why there is the listing on every single product page that tells you what's the metal in the earring, so that you can make the best decision for you. And so sometimes I do have to sacrifice the allergen component for style, but I always want to make sure that that's notable for people before they buy it. I don't want anyone to be surprised and they go wear their earrings and it's like, oh my God, my ears are burning. Because I've had that experience and it's not fun.
So kind of going on a broader concept about yourself, what do you think is your biggest achievement in life?
So wait, for life or my business?
You can do both.
Okay. My biggest achievement in life, I think still to this point, is, graduating from college. It was a really hard journey for a number of reasons. And so I'm still really proud of, finishing, because for a minute there, I was like, can I tap out? I'm over it. But in terms of my business, my biggest achievement is definitely having my earrings worn on a book cover. So I'm not sure if you know who Tabitha Brown is. She started off as like a vegan food influencer and has since, expanded to a number of different fields, including, acting and things of that nature. And so she recently wrote a book. And she wore my earrings that I had sent her, just kind of on a whim on her book cover. And so that was really, really exciting, especially since I kind of just randomly found out from the internet. And so I pretty much had a heart attack.
That must have been great. And in terms of like PR and sending, do you usually send to people, or is it more about, do you want them to see your product and buy it?
Well, it kind of depends. So I have, just sent earrings and just sent products to people before. She wasn't the first one. And I'm sure she won't be the last. But ideally, right, you always want people to buy your product if it's feasible, if it's possible. I also understand the level of skepticism, so I try to help people understand why they should buy my product instead of someone else's product, and what quality they're going to get, the value that they're going to get, the experience that they're going to get from doing so. And so I think it's kind of both, right? But I do have another friend who's also an entrepreneur, and the way he grew his business was just kind of sending out samples to people for them to try the product. And so while my product is not necessarily the kind that you can portion off and send, I will say it is something that I have since made a part of, my marketing and advertising budget, is to, send people free products and just see what they think about it. And I, kind of have the faith that once they experience it and once they get to wear them and they feel the weightlessness, and whether they choose to apply aromatherapy or whether they choose to apply essential oils or not, that they'll see the value in the product and want more of it.
Cool. So lastly, kind of where do you see yourself in 5 years? It could be personally or with your company, kind of just overall.
Well, I'm hoping that in 5 years, my business has maybe doubled or tripled in size, and that I have a brick and mortar. It's kind of a weird sort of thing to be an e-commerce business and want to expand to a physical space because, being online, your overhead is so low. But I do kind of want that physical presence because I do ultimately want to hire people. I specifically want to hire, young folks and/or folks who have been previously incarcerated because I feel like those are two groups that just kind of don't get a fair shot. So for youth in marginalized communities, there's something called the opportunity gap. And essentially what it means is just, like those students aren't able to get the same opportunities that some of their counterparts are able to get at like private schools, or if they come from lower income families, they can't take the unpaid internship that, is going to skyrocket their career post grad simply because, they have to contribute to the family or to the household. And, they don't have access to those opportunities. And for formerly incarcerated folks, there aren't a ton of good jobs for them to access due to their past. And I think that's a challenge and a problem, but we're not going to talk prison reform or things like that today. But I want to be a solution to that problem. But given the two groups, they can't necessarily work together. So I'm still trying to figure out how I make that happen. But it is something like I want to hire people that can create an impact and a positive footprint in my community. So hopefully in 5 years, I've been able to create a few pathways to make that possible.
I think that's beautiful. Great goal. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Where can the listeners find you if you have an Instagram or obviously Hippie Adjacent that they can reach out to you on?
Yeah, so first place is definitely the website, hippieadjacent.com, or on Instagram at hippie_adjacent. But if they sign up for the newsletter on the website, they will get premier access to all of the things. And so I definitely recommend both.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. I enjoyed our conversation.
Hey, I hope you loved this episode. If you did, rate and review on Apple Podcast and Spotify, or send it to people who you would think would be interested in listening in. You can learn more about the guests in the show notes or on the Design Find Instagram. The Design Find podcast is under the Entrepreneurs Network.